Hello, welcome to Exam Prep AZ-104. My name is Sarah Kong. I'm a Microsoft Certified Trainer and a Microsoft Technical Trainer. And I'll be leading you through these sessions to help you prepare to take the Microsoft Azure Administrator exam. So first things first, one of the things I like to talk about when you're getting ready to take your exam is what is your certification journey? So as you can see in here, one of the things you can do is, you can always self-paced learn. So that's one of the big things with the AZ-104. There's a lot of content online that you can get to. So self-paced learning is a big piece. We also have the ability so that you can actually take the course. So if you want to do like a virtual or in-classroom session of the AZ-104 course, you're more than welcome to do that. As well as you can also help with the AZ Administration for AWS SysOps course. So if you are transitioning from AWS to Azure, this course can help you with that. So the exam prep, you're currently here, and what you're going to be doing is you're going to be learning all about what you need to know to take this exam. One of the things that I highly recommend is that you have at least 6 months experience with this. It's not an easy exam. It's probably one of the toughest exams I've ever taken, and I've taken many Azure exams. It's one of those ones that you take at the beginning, so you really want to get through and learn this material, spend the time and learn this material. So there's lots of self-study resources. You've got the Doc Center. I'll show you a couple links in there. You've got the practice assessments. I'll show you those links shortly as well. So the objectives, and this is what we kind of call with the each exam, when you take them, they have something called objectives. And the objectives are, well, what do you need to learn to take that exam? So we're going to, first of all, I'll be identifying what will be covered on that exam. I'll also talk about, what you need to prioritize or revisit for that further study. So here's kind of the objective breakdown. First things first is you'll see that there's all about the identities and governance. And so the way it works is you'll see these what we call our groupings, and each grouping has that percentage that you'll see on the exam. So what they mean by that is you'll see 20 to 25% will be all about identities and governance. And then you'll have 20% that could be about up to 20 on storage. You've got up to 25% that's on the compute resources, so knowing your virtual machines, knowing your containers. You've got 20% on networking, so knowing on subnetting, and not how to subnet, but knowing how to create the subnets in Azure, knowing your network security groups, your peering, all of that. And then 15% will be about monitoring, so working with log analytics, the Azure alerts, and the other one, Network Watcher, right, which is a big network monitoring capability. So let's get into our first object domain, and this is going to be the one on identities and governance. So with one of the big changes that you might have noticed recently is we've introduced something called Entra ID. So Entra ID, you need to know what that is, right? Need to know that it is really Azure Active Directory, but we just rebranded it. So have a very good understanding of that. So let's walk through all of these objectives. So the first thing we want to learn about is, or you want to know about, I should say, is creating users and groups. So the 3 different types of groups, right? And those 3 different types of users, is you've got your cloud, you've got your hybrid, and you've got your guest. What are they? Well, you should know that, right? And that's what you need to know for the exam. You need to know what they are and when you would use them and all of that. You need to be aware of this portal, right? There's also the Entra Microsoft.com portal. Get to know that one as well. There'll be questions that you might see on the exam about that. And then also with Entra has what we call licenses, right? So know the difference between these licensing. Know that when we think about PIM and identity protection, that PIM and identity protection means you'll need a P2 license, right? Your self-service password reset means you need a P1 license. So you need to know that for the exam in order to be able to pass those questions. The other big concept is no external users, right? So when you invite a guest, what happens with that guest account, right? How do you invite a guest? What is considered a guest, right? And this is all about really, when you think about what's considered a guest, it's anybody that's not part of your tenant, right? So any email that's outside of your creating a user, you're going to invite them, and that's going to be what is an external user. Right? So once you do that, know when you would do that. You'll see questions where they might ask you, you have a customer that wants to have access to blah. And so when you give them access to blah, what do you need to do? Well, you invite them. Now, once you invite those guests and also work with your other accounts, how do you manage them? So that's where we need to know roles. Right? And there's different built-in rules. Know these ones, right? These are the ones that you will see on the exam. Specifically, knowing the difference between the user access administrator, the contributor, and the owner. Those are the three ones that you'll get some of those tricky questions where they're going to say, give you a scenario where, Bob needs access to be able to create something. So do you give him owner rights or is it just contributor? But what if he needs to delete it? Or what if he needs to give someone else access? So this is where you need to know the difference between all three of these. Okay? And the other thing too, which isn't on the exam anymore, but be aware that this is all written in a JSON language. They don't get heavy in it in the exam anymore, but also know that there is custom built-in rules, or not built-in, I should say, custom roles that you can also create. So to understanding that is created by using the JSON templates that you can then import into your tenant, giving you the ability to create those custom roles. So have an understanding of how that happens. You don't necessarily have to know how to write these templates. That's another course altogether, but have an understanding about all of that. Now, one of the big ones that you really, really need to know, and it's very, very important, is scoping. I also like to call this the hierarchy. Okay? When we think of the hierarchy, know at what levels that you can scope your permissions. And this also not just goes with permissions, but this also will work with policies as well. So when we think about working with Azure policies, one of the things that we need to know is where we can scope it. Also be aware that when you're doing these different scopes, that it all is inheritable. And here's the big one for the exam. You can't break inheritance, right? So I should probably put that. No breaking inheritance. So what they mean by that is when you scope your permissions or your policies, and that could be either at the management group, subscription, resource group, or role, then you can't break that. So that's a big one that you need to know for the exam. Now with the roles and everything, also be aware that there is your Azure roles, or actually now, I apologize, it's actually called Entra roles, and your Entra AD roles. Right? Know the difference between those two. So what are they? So this is your administrator type roles. And then this will become more of your resource type roles. And also be aware of the scoping on that as well. Now I did mention policies a second ago. That's a big piece to know as well. And one of the things with policies is it's also about the scoping, but the other thing is there's a difference between a policy initiative and an initiative definition. If you're thinking to yourself, what is she going on about? Well, go back to your study notes because you need to know that. An initiative definition is a grouping of policies, right? Where a policy is just single. So know the difference between that because you will get tested on that. And know that, when you get those types of questions where they're asking you about governance or compliance, that's what you're looking at. It's probably going to be some type of policy answer you're going to be looking for. The other big thing with compliance is you also need to know about your resource logs. So there's 2 resource logs. Know those, right? Know what happens if you do a delete as opposed to read-only or vice versa. Be very aware of that. Now, when we think about resource groups, we also know that they're very much like a container. So be aware of that resource groups can't be nested, right? It's a very flat structure in Azure, right? All resources need to be part of a resource group, right? You can move that. So be aware of all of these, what you can do with resources within a resource group. Know that they could be part of many regions. So with the resource groups also comes your subscriptions. So have an understanding of your subscriptions, how that they're your billing atmosphere or billing capability, right? Know that there's different types of subscriptions, right? When you would use a different type of subscription. Basically, they're for your invoicing. They're, like I said, it's all about that billing capability. Right? So without a subscription, can you build a resource? No, right? So be aware of that. Also, think about how I'm going to manage my costs and everything. So understand the whole cost optimization tool. You might not get heavily tested on it. However, you might get questions where they're going to ask you questions about, how am I going to create a budget? Well, that's part of the cost optimization tool. So be aware of that. Now, what if you have multiple subscriptions? How do you manage that? So that's working with management groups, right? Have an understanding of management groups and why you use them. They're great for your security, right? They're great for that policy capability. And it's again, would you use a management group for one subscription? No. The whole point of management groups is to be able to manage multiple subscriptions. So other things that you should be aware of. So be aware of tagging, one of my favorites, right? I'm an old SharePoint administrator. If you don't have metadata, then you're doing it wrong. So be aware of tagging, right? Interpret access management. Be aware of your manage and user group properties. And then finally, be aware of the self-service password reset. And I said earlier, that requires, not a P2, a P1 license, right? Hint, hint. Trick question there. So all in all, be aware of, your users and groups, your resource groups, the role access, right? Go through some hands-on, get to learn where everything is in the portal, and you're going to do great.